Right now, beneath every forest on Earth, something is happening that science did not confirm until the 1990s. The trees are connected. Not by their roots, not by the air, but by something that lives in the soil between them, something so thin that a single strand is invisible to the naked eye, something that spreads for kilometers in every direction, branching and linking and reaching until it has woven the entire forest into a single living network. It is called mycelium. It is the body of a fungus, and it connects the trees of a forest the way cables connect the computers of the internet. Older trees send carbon to younger ones. Sick trees receive nutrients from their neighbors. A tree being attacked by insects sends a chemical warning through the network, and the trees around it begin producing defensive compounds before the insects arrive. This is the Wood Wide Web. It is not a metaphor. It is a real structure, measurable and mappable, buried a few centimeters beneath the forest floor, operating continuously, quietly, in the dark. Welcome to Sleepy Science Stories. Tonight we are going underground into the soil of ancient forests to follow the threads of the Wood Wide Web and understand what happens there. It is a slow story. It takes place at the pace of trees, which is very slow indeed. And it is the kind of story that changes how you see a forest. Because once you know the network is there, you cannot walk among trees the same way again. You are already in the network tonight. You just cannot feel it. Let your breathing slow. Let the room go quiet. The forest is patient. It has been waiting billions of years. It can wait a few more minutes for you to settle. The science behind the Wood Wide Web is real, though it is also contested, and tonight we will follow both the discoveries and the debates. Because the truth is always more interesting than the simplified version. And the truth here, even in its more cautious form, is still one of the most surprising stories in modern biology. The word mycorrhiza comes from the Greek for fungus and root. Scientists have known about the physical connection between fungi and plant roots since the 1880s, when a German botanist named Albert Bernhard Frank first described it in detail. For a century, the partnership was understood as a simple exchange. Plants give carbon, fungi give minerals. Useful, but not remarkable. What changed in the 1990s was the understanding that these fungal connections between individual plants were not isolated. They formed networks. One fungal organism could connect to dozens of trees at once, and through those connections, things could pass from tree to tree that had no business being there at all. Carbon labeled in one tree appearing in the tissues of a different species nearby. That was the discovery that changed everything. And from that discovery came a new way of seeing what a forest actually is. Not a collection of individual trees competing for light and water, but a community, bound together by invisible threads, sharing resources across the distances between them, functioning in some ways less like a collection of individuals and more like a single distributed organism. This is what the network is. This is what it does. And this is where we are going tonight. The mycelium does not sleep. The network is always running. And tonight, while you are lying still, somewhere under a forest floor, a thread of fungus is carrying carbon from an old tree to a young one. The young one will survive the winter because of it. The forest will continue because of it. And neither the tree nor the fungus knows anything about it at all. Most people think of fungi as mushrooms, but the mushroom is only the smallest part of what a fungus is. The mushroom is the fruit. It appears above ground for a few days or weeks, releases its spores, and disappears. What remains is the real body of the organism, and it is underground. It is called mycelium. It is a network of threads called hyphae, each one thinner than a human hair. A single teaspoon of healthy forest soil can contain several kilometers of these threads. They grow in every direction. They branch constantly. They fill the soil with a web so dense that it becomes almost invisible as a structure, because it is everywhere. Mycelium is one of the oldest forms of life on Earth. Fungal fossils have been found that are more than 800 million years old. Long before trees existed, fungi were already living in the soil, breaking down rock into the minerals that the first land plants would eventually need. When plants colonized the land, roughly 450 million years ago, the fungi were already there, and almost from the beginning, plants and fungi formed a partnership. The plant made sugar through photosynthesis. The fungus could not photosynthesize, but the fungus could reach into tiny cracks in rock and soil that roots could never enter, and extract phosphorus and nitrogen and water from places the plant could not access. So they traded. The plant gave sugar to the fungus. The fungus gave minerals and water to the plant. And this trade, this symbiosis, is still happening today in approximately 90% of all plant species on Earth. It is the oldest and most widespread partnership in the history of life. The oldest living organisms on Earth may be fungi. A honey fungus in Oregon's Blue Mountains covers nearly 9 square kilometers. It has been growing for an estimated 2,000 to 8,000 years. It is considered one of the largest and oldest living organisms ever documented. This fungus is mostly underground. Most of what it is invisible. The mushrooms that occasionally appear on the surface are temporary. The mycelium beneath the surface is permanent, expanding slowly outward year by year, century by century. Mycelium grows differently from plant roots. Plant roots grow at their tips, pushing forward into new soil. Fungal hyphae grow at their tips as well. But they also branch constantly. And the branches branch again, creating a web that fills volume rather than penetrating it. A single spoonful of rich forest soil can contain more kilometers of fungal threads than there are kilometers in the Amazon River. These threads are not passive. They are constantly secreting enzymes into the soil around them, breaking down organic matter and mineral particles, absorbing the products of that decomposition. Fungi are the primary decomposers of the forest. Without them, the leaves and wood and bodies of dead organisms that fall to the forest floor would accumulate and not break down. The nutrients locked inside them would never cycle back to the living trees above. The forest floor is a managed system. The fungi are its managers, and the same threads that break down the dead are woven into the roots of the living, connecting what grows above ground to what decomposes below, cycling the forest's resources in a loop that has been running without interruption for hundreds of millions of years. The partnership between fungi and plant roots is not optional for most trees. It is as essential as sunlight. Trees grown in sterilized soil without mycorrhizal partners grow poorly, even with adequate water and nutrients, because there are limits to what roots alone can access. The fungus is not an accessory. It is part of what a tree is. The connection between a tree and a fungus is called a mycorrhiza. The word comes from the Greek for fungus and root. It is formed when fungal hyphae enter the roots of a tree and weave themselves into the tissue there. There are 2 main types. The first type, called ectomycorrhiza, forms a sheath around the outside of the root. The hyphae wrap the root in a dense layer and then push between the cells, but do not enter the cells themselves. This type is common in the trees of temperate forests, the oaks and pines and beeches and Douglas firs. The second type, called arbuscular mycorrhiza, goes further. The hyphae actually penetrate the root cells and form branching structures inside them called arbuscules. These are the sites where the exchange of nutrients happens most directly. This type is more common in tropical forests and in agricultural crops. In both cases, the tree gives the fungus something it cannot make itself: carbon in the form of sugar produced by photosynthesis. As much as 30% of all the carbon that a tree captures from the air through its leaves goes directly to the fungus living in its roots. This is not a small investment. Trees are paying an enormous biological cost to maintain the partnership. What they receive in return is access to a much larger volume of soil than their roots could ever reach alone. Fungal hyphae are so thin that they can enter pores in the soil that roots cannot. They can extract phosphorus from mineral particles by releasing acids that dissolve the rock surface. They dramatically increase the effective surface area of the root system, sometimes by a factor of 100 or more. But the mycorrhiza is not just a connection between one tree and one fungus. The same fungal network connects many trees. And that is where the story becomes extraordinary. The extent of a single mycorrhizal network can be staggering. One study in a Douglas fir forest in British Columbia found that a single fungal individual, a single genetic organism, was connected to 47 different trees of multiple species. The network of that one fungal organism spanned hundreds of square meters of forest floor. Multiply that by the hundreds or thousands of different fungal species and individuals living in a mature forest soil, each forming its own network of connections with overlapping sets of trees, and the picture that emerges is not a simple web, but an incomprehensibly complex weave of relationships. A hyperdimensional tangle of connections in which almost every other tree by at least one fungal pathway. The ecologist Merlin Sheldrake, who has spent his career studying mycorrhizal networks, describes the soil of a mature forest as fundamentally relational. The soil does not just contain organisms. It is a record of all the relationships that have existed between organisms over the centuries the forest has stood. The connections in the network are not static. They form and dissolve and reform. A fungus may connect to a tree for a season and then be outcompeted by another fungal species. Trees may colonize different fungal partners as they age. The network is dynamic, constantly rewiring, responding to the changing conditions above ground. But its broad structure, the pattern of connections between the largest and oldest trees and the rest of the forest, tends to be stable over decades. The hubs persist. The younger trees grow into the network and become connected to the existing web of relationships rather than building new ones from scratch. The network accumulates. It learns the forest, and it carries that knowledge, encoded in its structure, forward through time. In the forests of British Columbia, a scientist named Suzanne Simard spent her career following the threads. She began as a forester. Her job was to plant trees in clear-cut areas, and the trees kept dying. The standard explanation was competition. The broadleaf trees that grew naturally in the disturbed areas were supposedly taking light and water from the planted conifers. Simard suspected something else was happening. She suspected the problem was not competition but disconnection. The planted conifers had no fungal network to join. To test her idea, she designed an experiment in the forests of British Columbia in the 1990s. She injected radioactive carbon dioxide into birch trees and carbon-14 into Douglas fir seedlings. Then she waited. The results were published in Nature in 1997. Carbon was moving from the birch trees to the Douglas fir seedlings through the mycorrhizal network. Underground. Chemically labeled carbon from one species appearing in the tissues of a completely different species nearby. The trees were sharing. Simard extended this research over decades. She found that the sharing was not random. It was directed. Larger, older trees, the ones she called mother trees, were sending disproportionately more carbon to younger, smaller seedlings that were growing in shade. The seedlings in shade could not photosynthesize enough to survive. They were carbon deficient, and the network, responding to that deficit, channeled more resources toward them. The mother trees were, in a functional sense, feeding their young. Simard's work was initially met with skepticism. The idea that trees shared resources with each other went against the prevailing model of forest ecology, which emphasized competition as the primary driver of forest dynamics. Trees compete for light. They compete for water. They compete for soil nutrients. The idea that they also cooperated, that they channeled resources toward the weak, rather than the strong, was not what ecologists expected to find. But the isotope data was hard to dismiss. Radioactive carbon moving from one tree to another, through the soil, with no possible pathway other than the fungal network. The experiment was replicated. The result held. Subsequent work by Simard and others added layers of detail. The transfers were larger when the receiving tree was shaded. They were larger between related trees. They were larger in established forests than in recently disturbed ones, and they made a measurable difference. Seedlings receiving carbon through the network survived at higher rates than isolated seedlings, even when the above-ground conditions were identical. The mother tree concept became controversial, not because the data was wrong, but because of what people made of it. Scientists who study insects and bacteria noted that similar kinds of network-mediated resource sharing had been observed in many other organisms without anyone calling it care or altruism. The language of the mother tree was seen by some as anthropomorphizing, projecting emotional categories onto a physical process. Simard acknowledged the criticism but held to the concept, not as a claim about the subjective experience of trees, but as a description of a functional role. In the network, large old trees function as sources. Young struggling trees function as sinks. Resources flow from source to sink. The pattern that results looks like care. Calling the source tree the mother tree captures that pattern in language that humans can hold and remember. Whether it is the right word is a matter of taste. The pattern it describes is real. The data is real. The transfers are real. The survival benefit is real. Whether we call the old tree a mother is a question of language. Whether the young tree would have lived without it is a question of fact. In Simard's experiments, in forest after forest, the connected seedlings lived at rates the disconnected ones could not match. How does a tree know that another tree needs help? It does not think. It does not decide. There is no brain. There is no nervous system in the way that animals have them. But the network still responds to need, and understanding how it does so reveals something remarkable about the chemical intelligence of living systems. The key mechanism is the source-sink gradient. A tree producing more sugar than it needs is a source. A tree producing less than it needs is a sink. Sugar, in a living system, moves from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration, from source to sink. When a young tree in shade has depleted its carbon reserves, the concentration of carbon at its root tips drops. The fungal network connecting it to a large sunlit tree maintains a gradient between the two. Carbon flows down the gradient from the well-supplied tree toward the depleted one. The fungus is not doing this out of generosity. The fungus is maintaining its own supply of carbon. It receives carbon from multiple connected trees. When one of those trees is starving, the fungus benefits from helping it recover, because a dead tree is a dead source of carbon. The cooperation emerges from self-interest. But the result, at the level of the forest, looks indistinguishable from care. Phosphorus moves in the opposite direction, from fungus to plant. Nitrogen moves similarly. Water follows the same gradient principles. The network is constantly redistributing resources across the forest, buffering the effects of drought in one area, supplementing the nutrition of trees in another, evening out the inequalities of light in soil and water that individual trees cannot address on their own. The forest, considered as a single system, is more stable than any individual tree within it. The gradient mechanism is elegant because it requires no coordination, no signaling between trees, no communication in the conventional sense. The carbon just flows. Physics does the work. But there are complications. The fungi that conduct the transfer are not passive pipes. They actively regulate what passes through them and what stays in their own tissue. Research suggests that mycorrhizal fungi retain roughly 30% of the carbon they receive from host trees, using it to fuel their own growth and reproduction. The remaining 70% is distributed to other parts of the network, including other connected trees. This means the fungi are not simply allowing carbon to flow down gradients. They are managing the flow, taking their cut, and making decisions about allocation. Whether those decisions are purely chemical and physical, or whether there is something more complex operating in the fungal tissue, is not fully understood. The philosopher and biologist Andreas Weber, in his book Biology of Wonder, suggests that the mycorrhizal network represents a form of distributed decision-making that is different from the centralized nervous system of animals, but functionally comparable to it. The network does not have a brain, but it has something that brain-like in its ability to integrate information from across the forest and respond to that information in ways that benefit the whole. This is a speculative interpretation, and most mycologists would describe what the network does in purely mechanical terms. But the question is genuinely interesting. At what point does the integration of information and the coordination of responses across a large, complex, decentralized system become something that deserves a more than mechanical description? The forest does not know the answer, but it keeps asking the question in the only way it knows how: by growing. The gradient does not ask permission. The carbon moves because the physics says it will. The result looks like care. The mechanism is pure chemistry. Both things are true at the same time, and the forest does not need to resolve the tension between them. It just grows. There is another thing the network does. It sends warnings. When a tree is attacked by insects, it produces chemical compounds. Some of these are direct defenses, bitter or toxic substances that make the tree less palatable. Others are volatile chemicals released into the air, attracting predators of the insects. But some of the warning signal goes underground. A study published by David Johnson at the University of Manchester showed that when aphids attacked a broad bean plant, the neighboring plants connected to it by mycorrhizal network began producing defensive compounds before the aphids reached them. The signal traveled through the soil, through the fungal threads, from the attacked plant to its connected neighbors. The mechanism is not fully understood. It may involve chemical molecules passing through the hyphae. It may involve electrical signals, similar in principle to the nerve impulses of animals, propagating through the fungal network. The research is ongoing. What is established is the result. Connected plants respond to the distress of their neighbors before they experience it themselves. The network shares not just nutrients but information. Pine trees infested with budworms have been observed to increase warning signal production, with neighboring pines responding by ramping up their own defenses even when the insects have not reached them yet. The forest is, in some functional sense, paying attention, not consciously, not with intention, but the network produces behavior that, if you saw it in an animal, you would call alertness. The implications of this finding for forestry and agriculture have not gone unnoticed. If plants in a mycorrhizal network can warn each other about pest and disease attacks, then maintaining the network in agricultural fields and managed forests could reduce the need for pesticide application. Plants that are forewarned can prepare their own defenses. A forest or crop that shares information about threats can respond collectively rather than individually. Some agricultural researchers have begun exploring what they call second-generation mycorrhizal inoculants, preparations of multiple fungal species designed to establish complex networks in agricultural soils rather than simply colonizing individual crop plants. The goal is to create, in managed agricultural land, something approaching the functional complexity of a natural mycorrhizal community. The results so far are promising in some contexts and disappointing in others. Agricultural soils that have been heavily treated with synthetic fertilizers and pesticides for decades may lack the microbial community needed to support complex fungal networks. Simply adding fungi to degraded soil does not always work, because the other organisms that normally support and interact with mycorrhizal networks are absent. Rebuilding a mycorrhizal network in degraded agricultural soil is a project measured in years, not weeks, and the research suggests that the warning signal function of the network is one of the last to recover, requiring not just the presence of fungi, but a well-developed network with stable, long-term connections between plants. The forest took centuries to build its network. We cannot replace it in a planting season, but we can stop destroying what remains, and we can learn to build with it rather than against it. The network is not fast. A signal may take hours to travel from an attacked plant to its neighbors, but for a tree, hours is fast. A tree's response to a pest attack can take days. The hours of warning the network provides make a real difference. The neighboring trees begin their preparations before the attack arrives, and they are better prepared when it does. The network does not communicate in words. It communicates in molecules and electrical gradients, in the chemical language that living cells have been using to signal each other for longer than complex animals have existed. The warning it carries is wordless and slow and very old, but it works. In a forest in Switzerland, researchers found a tree stump that was still alive. Normally, when a tree is cut down, the stump dies within a few years. Without leaves, it cannot photosynthesize. Without photosynthesis, it has no source of carbon. Without carbon, the cells cannot maintain themselves. But this stump, estimated to be several hundred years old, was green. The cells of its roots were still alive. The cellular machinery was still functioning. The researchers analyzed the stump and found that it was receiving carbon from the roots of neighboring trees around it. Through the mycorrhizal network, the neighboring trees, all members of the same species, were keeping the stump alive. Why? The researchers offered two possible explanations. The first is that the stump's roots are still structurally useful to the surrounding trees, helping to anchor the soil and support the stability of the slope. Keeping the root system alive has mechanical benefits. The second explanation is more speculative. The stump and the surrounding trees share the same mycorrhizal network. The network distributes carbon based on concentration gradients, and the stump, with no photosynthesis of its own, is a persistent sink. Carbon flows into it simply because the gradient exists. What appears to be care may be physics, but the stump has been alive, without leaves, for what appears to be decades. It has been sustained by the forest around it. Whatever the mechanism, the result is a living entity that could not survive alone but persists because it is connected to others. The forest keeps its old ones alive. The stump was discovered by Christian Karner and Sebastian Lusinger, researchers at the Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand. They published their analysis in 2019. The stump was Kori, a species of ancient New Zealand tree. It had been cut at some point, probably by loggers. The cut surface was old and weathered, but the stump was alive. The researchers found that the stump's water content was fluctuating in opposition to the water content of the surrounding trees. When the trees drew water up in the morning, the stump's water content rose. When the trees reduced their water use at night, the stump's content fell. The fluctuations were synchronized, but out of phase. The most plausible explanation was hydraulic connection. The stump was connected to the surrounding trees by shared root grafts, physical fusions of root tissue, and the water and nutrients flowing through the root system of the grove were also flowing through the stump. The researchers concluded that the grove of trees was functioning as a single hydraulic unit. The stump was part of that unit. It was being maintained not by individual trees making individual decisions to help it, but by the collective water dynamics of the connected root system. What this suggests is that what looks like generosity may sometimes be an artifact of integration. When organisms are physically connected to each other, the flow of resources between them is not a choice but a consequence of the connections. The stump survives not because the trees chose to help it, but because the trees and the stump are, in a meaningful hydraulic sense, one thing. The distinction between cooperation and integration is philosophically significant. But from the stump's perspective, alive in the forest rather than rotting in it, the distinction may not matter much. The stump has no leaves. It will never have leaves again. It cannot photosynthesize. By every conventional measure of plant survival, it should be dead. But it is not dead. It is alive, connected, sustained by the forest around it. The network does not let it go. Forests are not just networks of connected trees. They are networks of related trees. Many trees reproduce not only by seed but by sending out root shoots. A grove of aspen trees, for example, may appear to be many individual trees, but may actually be a single organism. All the trunks connected underground to a single root system. The Pando Grove in Utah, a clonal colony of quaking aspen, covers 43 hectares and is considered one of the largest and oldest living organisms on Earth. But even trees that are not clonally connected seem to recognize their relatives. A study on Douglas fir trees found that mother trees send more carbon to seedlings that are their genetic offspring than to unrelated seedlings growing nearby. The trees cannot see each other. They cannot smell each other above ground. But somehow, through the root-fungus interface, they distinguish kin from non-kin. The mechanism proposed involves chemical signaling at the root surface. Trees may release compounds that identify their genetic identity, and the mycorrhizal network may respond differently to connected root tips depending on the signals they carry. This is not confirmed. It is a hypothesis, and a controversial one. Some researchers argue that the apparent kin preference is an artifact of how experiments are designed, that mother trees simply favor seedlings that are nearby and share the same fungal network by chance. The debate is ongoing, but the observation that started it is robust. In Douglas fir forests, seedlings growing near their genetic mothers survive better than seedlings growing near unrelated adults. Something is recognizing something. The forest has a memory of its own. The proposed mechanism for kin recognition in trees is based on a concept called self-non-self recognition, which is well established in immunology and in some plants. Plants can distinguish their own roots from the roots of other plants. When two root systems approach each other in the soil, they sometimes alter their growth patterns depending on whether they recognize the other roots as self or other. Related plants may grow their roots toward each other and intertwine them. Unrelated plants may grow their roots away from each other to avoid competition. This self-non-self recognition could, in principle, extend to the mycorrhizal interface. The fungal hyphae that connect to a tree's roots are interacting with the tree's root cell surfaces at a chemical level. If the tree produces compounds that identify its genetic identity, the fungus could preferentially channel resources toward root tips that carry familiar chemical signatures. The mechanism is not proven, but it would explain why the transfers in Simard's experiments appeared to favor seedlings growing in the same soil as their genetic mothers. The fungi connecting them may be operating on a chemical preference, favoring what they recognize. What is interesting about kin recognition in this context is what it says about the nature of the network. If the network can distinguish related from unrelated individuals and modulate the flow of resources accordingly, then it is not a passive physical system. It is a responsive one. It is doing something more than letting gradients equalize. It is actively directing resources based on information it carries about the identities of the organisms it connects. That is not consciousness. It is not intention, but it is information processing of a kind that deserves more careful study than it has so far received. The forest may know its own children, not with eyes, not with a brain, but with chemistry, with the specific molecular signatures of self and other that organisms have been using to recognize each other for longer than any brain has existed. The network may carry those signatures. It may route resources along lines of kinship. The evidence is suggestive. The research continues. If the mycorrhizal network is essential to forest health, what happens when it is disrupted? Modern forestry has provided an inadvertent experiment. When forests are clear-cut and replanted, the new seedlings are often planted as monocultures, single species in rows, on ground that has been mechanically disturbed and sometimes chemically treated. The existing mycorrhizal network, developed over decades or centuries in the old forest, is destroyed. The new seedlings must build their fungal connections from scratch. They start without the network support that seedlings in a mature forest benefit from at germination. In the early stages of their growth, they have no older trees to draw on, no established network to join, no warning system to protect them. Suzanne Simard's early observation, the one that launched her career, was that clear-cut replanted forests were less healthy than naturally regenerating ones. The trees were dying, and nobody could explain why by looking at the trees. The explanation was underground. In natural forest regeneration, the soil retains living fungal networks even after the canopy trees are gone. New seedlings germinate and immediately encounter existing hyphae looking for new hosts. The network rebuilds around them, drawing them into a community from the beginning. In a mechanically cleared and replanted site, that foundation is gone. The seedlings are alone. They compete. They fail at higher rates. They grow more slowly. The forest that eventually develops is less connected, less resilient, and less productive. Removing the trees removes more than the trees. It removes the network that makes trees possible. The evidence for network effects on seedling survival is strongest in mycorrhiza-dependent tree species, particularly conifers like Douglas fir and pine. These species have evolved in close partnership with their fungal networks over millions of years. Their seeds germinate with a pre-adapted expectation encoded in their biology that fungal partners will be present in the soil. When they are not present, the seedlings struggle. Their roots grow longer, searching for fungal partners that are not there. They allocate more energy to root growth and less to leaf and stem growth. Their photosynthesis is less efficient because their phosphorus intake is inadequate. They are more vulnerable to drought stress because their water absorption is limited. The difference in survival rates between seedlings in mycorrhizal soil and seedlings in mycorrhizal depleted soil can be dramatic. Studies in Douglas fir have shown survival rates 3 to 5 times higher in soils with established mycorrhizal communities. The seedlings are not just growing faster. They are surviving conditions that would kill their disconnected counterparts. This has practical implications for forestation projects. Planting seedlings in the absence of appropriate mycorrhizal inoculants is asking trees to grow without the partnerships their biology assumes will be present. The failure rates of forestation projects conducted on heavily disturbed sites may in part reflect the absence of the invisible community that healthy forest soils contain. The mycorrhizal community is sometimes called the forest's immune system. That is an imperfect analogy, but it captures something about the protective role that the network plays for individual trees. A tree connected to a rich mycorrhizal community is a healthier tree than a tree in sterile soil. Not because the soil contains magic, but because the network provides services that the tree cannot provide for itself. The mycelium in healthy forest soil is part of the forest. When the trees are removed, the mycelium begins to die. When the soil is disturbed, it is shredded and dispersed. When synthetic fertilizers are applied, the chemical environment changes and many fungal species cannot survive it. The tree is replanted. The network is not, and the tree grows in silence, without the web, alone in a way that trees in natural forests never are. Suzanne Simard became, somewhat reluctantly, famous. Her 1997 paper in Nature, sparked a popular fascination with tree communication that she partly welcomed and partly found distorting. The science was real, but the way it was communicated, through phrases like trees talking and forests caring, sometimes outran what the evidence could support. She wrote about this tension in her memoir, Finding the Mother Tree, published in 2021. She described the decades of work behind the headline result, the false starts and the methodological challenges, and the skepticism from colleagues who doubted that trees could be doing something that sounded so much like what animals do. She also described what it felt like to stand in a forest knowing what she knew, to see the trees not as individuals competing for light and water and soil, but as participants in a community. To know that the oldest trees in a forest are not just older, they are hubs. They are connected to the largest number of other trees. They process the most carbon. They send the most resources to the most recipients. They are, in the functional sense that matters to the network, the most important nodes. When an old-growth forest loses its oldest trees, it does not just lose their timber. It loses the most connected nodes in the network. The hubs go dark. The parts of the network that depended on them are suddenly less supported. The forest becomes less resilient in ways that are not visible until a drought or a pest or a disease arrives, and the weakened sections fail. Simard called the oldest, most connected trees the mother trees. Not because they are mothers in the biological sense, though some of them genetically are, but because their role in the network is to support the young and the vulnerable and the sick. Simard's book describes a discovery that she made late in her career that struck her as the most significant of all. She found that when mother trees were dying, they sent a pulse of resources into the network around them. More carbon than usual, more nitrogen, more defense signals. In the months before a mother tree died, the network around it received an unusually large transfer. She interpreted this as a kind of bequest, an old tree passing its accumulated resources to the network before it stopped producing them. The seedlings and younger trees in the area received a legacy from the dying mother that helped them survive the period of adjustment after the large old tree was gone. She was careful to note that this interpretation was not proven. The data showed a pre-death resource pulse. The interpretation of it as intentional bequest was her own, and she acknowledged that other explanations were possible. Stress responses in dying trees can increase resource export as the tree attempts to survive. The elevated transfer could be a distress response rather than a gift. But whether it was a gift or a stress response, the result was the same. The network around a dying mother tree received more resources in the months before her death. The trees that were connected to her were better nourished when she was gone. The forest did not mourn its old trees, but it used what they left behind. Simard herself was diagnosed with cancer while writing the book. The parallel between the dying trees and her own situation was not lost on her, and she wrote about it with a directness that gave her scientific memoir a quality rare in scientific writing. The sense of a person who had spent her life studying the relationship between death and the continuation of the community that death feeds. It is tempting to tell this story from the tree's point of view. The mother tree feeds the seedling. The connected plants warn each other. The forest cooperates. But the fungi have their own story, and their interests are not always aligned with the trees. Mycorrhizal fungi are not altruists. They are organisms pursuing their own survival. They need carbon to live. They extract that carbon from the trees they connect to. The relationship that looks like cooperation is, from the fungus's perspective, a managed exploitation of a photosynthetic resource. The fungi maintain the trees because dead trees are no longer producing carbon. When a tree in the network is stressed, the fungus benefits from helping it recover. Not out of solidarity, but because a recovering tree is a continuing source of sugar. The fungi also compete with each other. Different fungal species occupy different parts of the soil and form connections with different trees. They compete for root tips to colonize, for carbon sources to access, for territory in the soil. The network is not a harmonious community. It is an ecosystem, with all the complexity and conflict that ecosystems contain. Some fungi are more beneficial to their host trees than others. Some extract carbon and return less than they take. Under stress conditions, even normally mutualistic fungi can become more parasitic. The story of the Wood Wide Web is a story of interests that happen to align more often than they conflict, producing cooperation as an emergent result rather than as an intention. The forest is generous not because its members choose generosity, but because the conditions of the network make generosity the most effective strategy for survival. This does not make the forest less remarkable. It makes it more so. The relationship between fungi and trees has been evolving for 450 million years. In that time, it has been shaped by natural selection operating on both partners simultaneously. Trees that were better at attracting fungal partners, that produced more carbon, that maintained more stable root surfaces for colonization, survived better and left more offspring. Fungi that were better at serving their host trees, that channeled more phosphorus and water through the network, maintained their connections longer, and accessed more carbon. The result of 450 million years of this mutual selection is a partnership so tightly integrated that many tree species cannot survive without their fungal partners, and many mycorrhizal fungal species cannot survive without their tree hosts. But the integration is not perfect, and the interests of the two partners are not identical. Trees benefit from having multiple fungal partners. A tree connected to many different fungal species has access to more diverse services. Different fungal species are better at accessing different soil conditions, different mineral types, different water sources. Diversity in the fungal community translates to resilience in the tree. Fungi benefit from connecting to many different trees. A fungus connected to many trees has multiple carbon sources, which buffers it against the loss of any individual host. The interests of both partners push toward the creation of larger, more connected networks. Neither the tree nor the fungus needs to cooperate with the other's competitors, but the network they create together, by each pursuing its own interests, ends up being shared, and the sharing creates the community that makes the forest function. The Wood Wide Web is not a network designed for sharing. It is a network built by self-interest that ended up being a medium for sharing. The difference matters philosophically. It does not change what the network does. A handful of forest soil is one of the most complex environments on Earth. A single gram of healthy forest soil contains millions of bacteria, thousands of fungal hyphae, hundreds of species of microorganisms, nematodes, mites, springtails, protozoa, earthworms, and their smaller relatives, each one occupying a role in the decomposition of organic matter, the cycling of nutrients, the maintenance of soil structure. The mycorrhizal network is embedded in this community. It is not the only thread connecting organisms in the soil. Bacterial networks, chemical gradients, physical interactions between roots and soil particles, all of these create a web of relationships that science is only beginning to map. The soil beneath a mature forest has taken centuries to develop. The fungal networks that thread through it have been growing and expanding and linking trees for as long as the forest has stood. Some fungal organisms are extraordinarily old. A honey fungus in Oregon's Blue Mountains, Armillaria ostoyae, is estimated to cover nearly 9 square kilometers and may be several thousand years old. It is considered one of the largest living organisms on Earth. The soil of an old-growth forest is not just dirt. It is a living structure, built over centuries, maintained by millions of organisms, encoding in its chemical and physical properties the history of the forest above it. When we lose an old-growth forest, we lose the soil as well. The structure that took centuries to build can be destroyed in a day by mechanical disturbance. It can take decades for a disturbed soil to recover the biological complexity of a mature forest soil, if it recovers at all. The forest is not just the trees. The forest is everything below them. The carbon stored in forest soils globally is enormous. It exceeds the carbon currently in the atmosphere. It exceeds the carbon in all living vegetation on Earth. Forest soils are the largest terrestrial carbon store on the planet. The mycorrhizal network is central to how that carbon gets into the soil and stays there. When fungi break down organic matter, they incorporate carbon into their own tissue. Fungal tissue is high in a compound called glomalin, a glycoprotein that is extremely stable in soil. Glomalin persists in soil for decades or centuries after the fungus that made it has died. It binds soil particles together, creating aggregates that give healthy soil its crumbly structure. And because it is stable, it keeps the carbon it contains out of the atmosphere for a very long time. A significant fraction of the carbon stored in forest soils is stored in glomalin and other stable fungal compounds. Destroying the mycorrhizal network of a forest releases that carbon. The physical disturbance of the soil, the removal of the tree roots that supported the fungal community, the elimination of the chemical environment that the fungi maintained. All of these cause the fungal biomass to decompose and the carbon it contained to return to the atmosphere. This is one of the less discussed consequences of deforestation. The loss of the trees is visible. The loss of the soil carbon is not. But over time, the release of carbon from the destroyed soil community may equal or exceed the carbon stored in the trees themselves. The forest's carbon is not just in the wood. It is in the soil. It is in the fungi. It is in the invisible network that binds the trees together and has been accumulating carbon, molecule by molecule, for as long as the forest has stood. Healthy forest soil is dark and rich and full of life. Degraded soil is pale and compacted and nearly silent. The difference between them is not just chemistry. It is the centuries of biological activity that healthy soil represents, the accumulation of dead fungi and bacterial communities and organic matter that has been processed and reprocessed and bound into the stable structures that make the soil what it is. That accumulation cannot be hurried. In 1999, a study by Rensen Zhang and colleagues found something unexpected. Tomato plants sharing a mycorrhizal network with each other showed a measurable response when one of the connected plants was infected with a disease-causing fungus. The uninfected plants began producing defense enzymes. They upregulated genes associated with resistance. They were preparing for an attack that had not yet reached them. The only connection between the infected plant and its unaffected neighbors was the mycorrhizal network. The warning had traveled underground. Subsequent research extended this finding. Bean plants warned each other through the network about aphid attacks. Chili plants shared resistance signals with tomatoes. Tall fescue grasses protected neighboring barley from fungal pathogens. The plant kingdom's underground internet carries more than food. It carries something functionally equivalent to news. The forest, in this sense, has something like awareness. Not the awareness of a brain, not the awareness of an animal, but the collective awareness of a network that integrates information from across its extent and responds to that information in ways that benefit the whole. A forest that shares warnings is a forest that sees threats before they arrive. A forest that sees threats before they arrive is a forest that survives them better. And a forest that survives better is a forest that has been, in some functional sense, paying attention all along. The speed of signal transmission through mycorrhizal networks is slow compared to the nerve impulses of animals. A warning signal may take hours to travel from one plant to another. But the plants receiving the signal have hours to respond before the threat arrives. For organisms that cannot move, hours of preparation is valuable. Some scientists propose that the signals travel as chemical molecules moving through the cytoplasm of connected hyphae. Others propose that electrical signals, generated by ionic gradients across cell membranes, propagate through the network. The evidence supports both mechanisms operating in different contexts. The network hears slowly, chemically, electrically, but it hears. The plant defense response to mycorrhizal network signals involves a process called priming. A primed plant has not yet activated its full defense response. It is in a state of readiness, with the genes and enzymes associated with defense at elevated levels, but not yet fully expressed. When the actual threat arrives, a primed plant can activate its full defense response faster and more strongly than an unprimed plant. This is more energy efficient than maintaining full defense responses all the time. Running a full immune response is metabolically expensive. A plant that maintained peak defense continuously would have less energy for growth and reproduction. Priming allows the plant to maintain a low-cost state of readiness and then escalate quickly when the threat arrives. The mycorrhizal network, by transmitting warning signals between plants, enables network-wide priming. When an aphid attack begins at one plant in a connected community, the entire community enters a primed state. When the aphids spread, they encounter plants that are already prepared to defend themselves. The network essentially functions as an early warning system, extending the effective sensing range of the community far beyond what any individual plant could achieve on its own. There are limits to this capability. The signal degrades with distance. Long-distance transmission through large networks is less reliable than short-distance transmission between nearby plants. And the signal must pass through the fungal tissue, which means the fungus has some influence over whether and how strongly the signal is transmitted. But within a connected community of plants sharing a dense mycorrhizal network, the early warning system appears to function well enough to measurably improve survival rates when pests and pathogens arrive. The community is more resilient than its individual members. The forest does not feel pain, but it responds to damage in ways that reduce further damage. The response travels through the network. The network changes the behavior of the plants that receive the signal, and the forest that shares its information about threats survives those threats better than a forest that cannot share. The network is not consciousness, but it is something. It is a distributed response to a distributed threat. Not everyone agrees that the Wood Wide Web is what the popular accounts say it is. In 2023, a group of researchers published a critical review of the mycorrhizal network literature. They found that many of the most cited studies had been overinterpreted. The amount of carbon actually transferred between trees through the network was, in many experiments, small. Much of it stayed in the fungal tissue rather than reaching the connected trees. The idea that mother trees deliberately nurture their offspring, they argued, was an anthropomorphic overreach. The data showed carbon gradients following physical laws, not intention. The language of care and communication, they suggested, had been imported from animal behavior and applied to a phenomenon that was better described in chemical and physical terms. Simard and her colleagues disputed these conclusions. They argued that the critical review had focused on short-term experiments that missed the cumulative effects of long-term network support. They pointed to field data showing seedling survival rates in connected versus unconnected soils. The debate is real. Science works this way. A surprising finding gets attention. Popular accounts amplify it. Critics examine the evidence more carefully. And the truth that eventually emerges is usually more complicated than either the enthusiastic early reports or the skeptical rebuttals. What is not in dispute is that mycorrhizal fungi connect trees, that carbon moves through those connections, that connected seedlings survive better than disconnected ones, that plants respond to signals traveling through fungal networks. The scale and interpretation of these effects remains contested. The effects themselves are real. The debate over the Wood Wide Web has also raised questions about the limits of popular science communication. The story of trees talking to each other is a beautiful story. It captures the imagination. It makes people feel differently about forests. It has probably done more to promote public support for forest conservation than any number of dry technical papers about carbon cycling and biodiversity metrics. But beautiful stories can become detached from the evidence that originally supported them. They can be repeated and amplified until they carry more weight than the science can bear. And when the scientific community pushes back, as it did in the 2023 review, the correction is less compelling than the original story. This is not a problem unique to the Wood Wide Web. It is a recurring pattern in the communication of biological science, where the complexity and ambiguity of real experimental data is regularly simplified into narratives that are easier to tell and to remember. The mycorrhizal network is a real and important biological phenomenon. The evidence for resource transfer between connected plants is solid. The evidence for chemical signaling through the network is solid. The debate is about magnitudes and mechanisms, not about whether the network exists and does interesting things. What the debate asks of us is to hold complexity, to find the story of the Wood Wide Web still wonderful, but to also find the detailed, contested, uncertain science that underlies it equally wonderful. To be interested in what we know, and also in what we do not know, and also in how we find out. The forest can hold that complexity. It has been holding it for hundreds of millions of years, working out the relationships between its members trial and error, season by season, in the dark. The true story, the one that emerges from the debate, is still a remarkable story. It is just more honest. The network is real. The transfers are real. The signals are real. The cooperation is real, in the sense that the network produces outcomes that benefit the community, even though no individual within it is trying to benefit the community. That is enough. The forest does not need the exaggerated version of its story. The true version is extraordinary. If a single tree is connected to dozens of other trees through a shared fungal network, and those trees are connected to dozens more, and the network extends across the entire forest, then what is the forest? Is it a collection of individual organisms? Or is it, in some meaningful sense, a single organism? This question has no simple answer. It depends on how you define organism. By one definition, an organism is a collection of cells with a common genetic identity. Under that definition, a forest is clearly not a single organism. Each tree has its own genome, its own cellular identity. By another definition, an organism is a functionally integrated system in which the parts coordinate their activities to maintain the whole. Under that definition, a forest connected by a mycorrhizal network has some of the properties of an organism. Resources are redistributed from areas of surplus to areas of deficit. Stress signals are shared. The behavior of one part influences the behavior of others. The forest is not an organism in the way that a mouse or a tree is an organism, but it is not simply a collection of independent individuals either. It is something in between, what biologists call a superorganism, a community of individuals so tightly integrated that the community itself has properties that none of the individuals possess alone. This is not a metaphor. It is a description of what the data shows. The mycorrhizal network creates interdependencies that make the forest more than the sum of its trees, and understanding that changes what it means to protect a forest, because protecting individual trees is not the same as protecting the relationships between them. The question of what counts as an organism runs through biology at many scales. A colony of ants behaves in some ways like a single organism. The individual ants respond to chemical signals from each other and coordinate their activities in ways that produce colony-level behaviors that no individual ant could produce alone. Ant colonies have collective immune responses, collective temperature regulation, collective memory in the form of pheromone trails. Is the colony an organism? Most biologists say no, but only because of how we draw the definitional lines. The colony lacks genetic individuality. Its members are separate organisms that happen to cooperate extensively. But the forest situation is different again. The trees are genetically distinct. The fungi are genetically distinct from the trees and from each other. But the network they form together is a functional integration across multiple genetic individuals, across multiple species, creating a collective behavior that none of the participants could produce alone. The concept of a holobiont, a host organism together with all the microorganisms it carries, is increasingly applied in biology to single organisms like humans. We are, in this view, not individual organisms, but communities of organisms functioning as integrated wholes. Our gut microbiome is part of our metabolism. Our mitochondria were once separate bacteria. The distinction between an organism and its microbiome is, at the molecular level, somewhat arbitrary. The forest is a holobiont at scale. The trees, the fungi, the bacteria, the soil animals. All participants in a collective biology that is more stable, more resilient, and more productive than any of its members would be alone. Seeing the forest this way changes what it means to protect it. You are not protecting trees. You are protecting a relationship. You are protecting the network, and the network is the thing that makes the trees possible. The forest breathes. The forest cycles water. The forest stores carbon. The forest defends itself. The forest feeds its young. None of these things are done by trees alone. All of them are done by the community of organisms that includes the trees and the fungi and the bacteria and the soil animals and the mycorrhizal network that connects them. The forest does these things. The forest is the subject. The trees are part of it. Tonight, in every forest on Earth, the network is working. In the old-growth Douglas fir forests of British Columbia, a mother tree 300 years old is sending carbon to a seedling that germinated last spring. The seedling is in shade. It does not have enough light to feed itself, but the thread connecting its roots to the roots of the old tree is carrying sugar, and the seedling will survive the winter. In the pine forests of Scotland, a tree at the edge of the forest has been attacked by bark beetles. It is producing chemical compounds. Some of those compounds are traveling into the soil, into the hyphae, and through the network to other pines nearby. Those trees will have a few hours to prepare their defenses. In a forest in Japan, a stump that was cut 100 years ago is still alive. Still green inside, still drawing carbon from the trees that grew up around it, connected by the network that was there before the tree was cut, and will be there long after anyone alive today has died. The network does not know any of this. There is no awareness, no intention, no feeling. There is only chemistry and physics and the ancient logic of organisms that have been living in the soil for 800 million years. But the result, viewed from outside, looks like something. It looks like a forest that takes care of its own. It looks like an ancient system, slower than thought, larger than any individual within it, quietly redistributing what is needed to where it is needed, in the dark, in the cold, in the soil beneath the leaves beneath your feet. Sleep well. The forest is patient. It has been doing this for a very long time, and it will be doing it still when the night is over. The network running in the dark beneath the forest floor is one of the oldest systems on Earth. It predates trees. It predates animals. It was running when the first land plants colonized the bare rock of a world that had never seen a forest, helping them survive in an environment they were not evolved for. And it is running now, in the forests that remain, in the old growth stands where the mother trees are still standing, In the secondary forests, where the network is still rebuilding after past disturbance, in the small remnant patches of native trees and farmland, and suburbs where the mycorrhizal community still persists in the soil between the roots, the network does not need our understanding to function. It has been functioning for longer than our species has existed. But understanding it changes how we treat it. It changes whether we destroy the soil when we cut the trees. It changes whether we let old trees stand when they are no longer producing timber. It changes how we think about what a forest is and what it would mean to lose one. A forest is not just its trees. It is the invisible network that connects them. It is the accumulated relationships of centuries. It is the chemical memory of every drought and every pest and every season of abundance that the trees have lived through together. When you walk in a forest, you are walking on the roof of that network. Every step you take, the mycelium is there, a few centimeters below the surface, running its endless quiet operations in the dark. It does not know you are there, but you are part of the forest now, breathing its air, standing on its soil, connected to it in the way that everything above ground is connected to what grows below. Sleep well. The network is still running.